Hello and good morning, everybody. It's pretty amazing to see all of these faces here this morning. A lot of you I know from many years. And as Molly said, I moved back to West Michigan after 20 years away last summer. And I'm really excited to be back here and see how the creative community here is growing. It's really exciting. So I gotta figure out this clicker. I got it figured out. Okay. So today we're going to talk about commitment. As you know, as a lifelong artist, a divorcee, and a grad school dropout, I feel that I'm sufficiently qualified to have some thoughts on this topic. And I also recently got bangs, which some of you know is a huge commitment. You have to maintain them all the time. It's more than you think. So I think we can all agree that regardless of scale, commitment is hard. And I always think of the word forever when I think about commitment, like I'm going to be on some straight and narrow path for the rest of my life if I commit to something. And I think it's really easy to think about commitment as some kind of trap that's going to bind you to things or strip you of your freedom, whether it's a methodology or an identity or a person. Because I'd say my whole life I've been seeking independence, kind of like this carefree seagull gliding on an ocean current with a Cheeto in its mouth. And I've relished every opportunity to break free and change direction and to quit and to hit restart. But the longer I live, the more I realize that commitment and freedom can and do peacefully coexist. As a kid, the concept of commitment didn't cross my mind like most kids. I grew up in Grand Haven. And it was a great place to grow up. We had the woods in the backyard and the lake down the street, and it was a wonderful place for your imagination to run wild. I had wonderful parents who exposed me to great, interesting music and books, and were always interested in nurturing my interests, like art. And I had a great brother and sister, too. And it was just I won the happy childhood lottery, and I don't take that for granted. I did a lot of stupid things, that had no thought for the future, like cut my own hair and hide the trimmings under the couch, like no one was going to know. But I also made some bolder moves, like I spray painted my dad's car, and I followed that up because that was a hit, so I did my brother's train set next. So I went about the practice of growing up and making art and making mistakes, and just being a kid. And then when I was 11, we moved to Grand Rapids, and I had to attend East Grand Rapids High School and middle school, which as a brooding teen artist was kind of incongruous for me. It was a really great community, and I don't take that for granted, but I always, even then, felt like I had to caveat the fact that I went to East by saying, but we're not rich. But relatively speaking, we were comfortable, and my parents made the kind of sacrifices that they could afford so that their kids could have the kind of opportunities to explore their interests that I wish and hope that all kids could have. So I was an okay student. I didn't feel like any overwhelming drive to reach for the stars or follow my dreams, but I did a good job on school. And art was always there. It was sometimes in the foreground and sometimes in the background, but I didn't really conceive of myself on any singular career path. I had a lot of interests. I played the trombone. I thought about being a model. That's the middle photo. There was a Jacobson's department store call for models, and my mom helped me take some photos. It didn't go anywhere, believe it or not. But and I also played volleyball. So I don't know, I wanted to be a mime at some point, or a comedian, a Shakespearean actress. I was just all over the place, like a lot of kids. And life was rolling along. And I was really happy with the ramblings of my youth. And I didn't want to be told it was time to focus. Don't get me wrong, I had jobs. I had real tax-paying jobs at restaurants and whatnot. But I was in no hurry to start thinking about a career. But then one day, I was jolted awake from my lazy high school daydreaming, and suddenly, I was being told that it was time to focus. And I wasn't into it. I was barely an adult person, and I was now being asked to decide where I wanted to spend tens of thousands of dollars, which I didn't have, to plan for what I was going to be doing for the rest of my sweet, long life. I don't understand how we expect kids to know what to do or how that's a good idea. But I knew it was a bad idea for me to make that decision right then. As a kid, my dad got me hooked on Uncle Scrooge comics, and I was way more interested in holding on to my meager savings than spending more than I had. And I wasn't interested in chasing disappointment. Sorry, one second. I had the concept of long-term investment went right over my head. What I wasn't willing to acknowledge at that time was that anything that was worth committing to was fraught with risk. Maybe I could have been a little bit more daring then, but I wasn't. I was wishy-washy and indecisive, and I wasn't interested in committing myself to anything in which I'd have to potentially fail at something that I loved. I mean, how willing was I really to prove myself, or how willing was I really to pursue my dream? I wasn't really interested in doing it at that point. Sorry. I was a practical girl living in a practical world. And everybody had ideas for me for how I could monetize this thing that I loved. You could paint lighthouses, they might say. Or you could do family portraits. Or maybe you could do pet portraits. But I was like, no, 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 as my 5-year-old niece would say. None of that was what I wanted to do. And so I did the math, and I decided not to decide anything right away. I plodded along cautiously, building in survival measures. And thus began my baby stepping. So I made a safe, fiscally conservative move by going to Grand Rapids Community College, where I studied painting and drawing and art history. And I still couldn't see a way that I could turn my love of art into a career. I didn't have any interest in computers. I didn't have any interest in design. Digital art wasn't really even a thing then. There weren't even cell phones, so that gives you some idea of where technology was at. So I graduated from Grand Rapids Community College with my associate's degree, and I moved to Chicago. And it was there that I started a series of jobs that were like bad relationships. I told my parents I might go to the Art Institute, but I got sidetracked right away. And instead, I took an opportunity as a spray mount girl at a small design agency, because who doesn't want to be a spray mount girl? So I made sales boards for the sales team. And when I wasn't doing that, the art department would nurture me and teach me how to use Illustrator and Photoshop. And I got enough skills there to weasel my way into a job as a junior designer at another agency. And the boss there was willing to take a chance on me because A, I was super cheap labor, B, they wanted to add another illustrator to the art department, and C, because he wanted more young females in the art department to harass, unfortunately. So this was my greatest achievement at that job, which is an airbrush menu of cheeseburger, and it's a sunset, and I wanted to share it because it's like my first piece of digital art, and I think it's a real doozy. So, but my next gig was as an art director at a small publishing company, and we did these little mini cookbooks, the digest-sized cookbooks that you get at the grocery store checkout lane. And believe it or not, it wasn't the super fulfilling job. So after several years of ill-fitting design jobs, I came to the realization that I wasn't really happy with what I was doing. And with some nudging from artist friends, I decided to go back to school for art. So I enrolled in the University of Illinois at Chicago, and it was there that I learned about art that was made after 1960, and about women artists that weren't named Mary Cassatt and Georgia O'Keeffe, both of whom I love, but there's more. There's so much more. And it was the first time I really got to see the scope of what art could be and how it could not just reflect life, but also be a vehicle for social change and just get you thinking in new ways. So I'm just going to show you a few things that I really like, that I learned about in school. You know, the Guerrilla Girls were making this social work. This was for the New York Public Art Fund. They did this billboard that challenged how we see women in museums. It's self-explanatory. This is from 1989. This is Mike Kelly, who was making work with things from thrift stores, like things that people handmade, and sort of talking about the labor of love that's put into those pieces and how they become throwaway, or who values it. This is a piece by Andrea Zattel. called Escape Vehicle, and I love her sense of humor because how do you escape in that? I don't know, but I loved seeing how design and art were interacting and talking about functionality. I also was in an experimental noise band for a very short while, and the fun fact is that you don't have to know how to play an instrument in an experimental noise band. So, as you can see, I was also experimenting with hair and makeup. And this is a weird painting that I made. I made a bunch of weird paintings about the commercialization of the bridal industry. And so I was thinking about commitment then too. And I was actually like getting engaged at that point. So yeah, I don't know. I also made some sculptures about finding order and beauty in detritus. And it was really such an inspiring time for me, school. And I was starting to find my visual voice and learning how to be critical and communicate what I cared about, even if it was clunky at times. And I received my BFA in sculpture in 2006 from UIC. And I chose sculpture because it was the fastest way to graduate. And that was fine by me. So the time was right, and the signs were there, and I decided to move to New York and pursue my MFA. And let's see here. Oops, I'm going to go back one. Okay, the time was right, yes, as I said. I also got married right around then. I guess I was making up for years of risk repression. But if I'm being honest, I think I had very little confidence that this was all going to work out. And maybe I should have listened to my gut. Moving to New York was the best of times and the worst of times, but not in that order. So I couldn't figure out how to balance things. I hated grad school. I hated my cold, cavernous studio that was down the street from Port Authority. And everyone there seemed to know everything that had happened in contemporary art for the last 10 years except for me. And that made me feel pretty stupid or ignorant, and I got really depressed. And I started loathing the path that I was on, loathing, not loving, and mistrusting the art world. Here's some pieces that I made in grad school. And I kind of liked them, but I can't make a case for them. I couldn't make a case for them. And there's not a lot of room to like not make a case for your stuff when you're in grad school, as a lot of you probably know. So after one crushingly short, alienating semester at grad school, I got cold feet, I quit the program, and I retreated back to corporate living. And I spent the next few years holed up in a series of cubicles working as a relatively unremarkable designer with very little rigor or philosophy to guide me. But I did get a job as an art director at a magazine called Saveur, and it was a really nice soft place to land after the grad school incident. And I was always finding little ways to include drawing in my work, usually as an accent on an event invitation or something. We did a lot of events, it was cool. And I felt so relieved to find a fun job and work for nice people and have clear objectives and constraints. I was just like, ah. And so I went for years without making any personal work, and I was perfectly content. Until I wasn't. Because being an art director hadn't been my dream. I wasn't fulfilled by the work I was doing, but I didn't feel like I fit into the art world either. I found myself in the midst of an identity crisis. And so, of course, I went to Sweden for a few months to be a book designer. And shortly thereafter, I found myself divorced. Bad things were happening, but good things were happening too. Like, art came back into my life, like definitively. I started looking at the best parts of my life and my work and making connections between the moments that had brought me the most joy. It was when I could think creatively, work collaboratively, maintain some independence, and definitely when drawing or painting were involved. By then I was working for Parenting Magazine, and because I needed a little bit more chaos to really reorder things, I got laid off along with 30 of my colleagues. So I actually felt really free all of a sudden. I didn't feel too bad about it. And every few nights I would make a little book. I started illustrating like every day, attempting to manage my anxiety. Oops, books, sorry. I took to journaling to help me make sense of all of this chaos, and I gave myself these assignments. So every few nights I'd talk about what had happened to me the past couple of days, and I'd make little illustrations to go along with them. It was pretty fun. And on my own, my life turned upside down. I had time and space to dig into my brain and experiences, and I was learning a lot about what was there and what I wanted and what I was truly capable of. I wanted to be an illustrator, damn it. So I put in the work. Remember that straight path? That one that was pointing narrowly towards forever? It was a lie. Commitment is all about hitting the bumps in the road, taking unexpected twists and turns, and recalibrating. I had just gone through a really awful separation, and honestly, it was painful. But the good part about that situation was I realized that I could face risk, and I could overcome many more challenges than I thought I could. I could absolutely deal with bad shit. And so I started really working on illustration, and I made opportunities for myself where there weren't some. I started a recipe column for my neighborhood blog, and every week I would post a recipe with an illustration. I'd get a recipe from a chef in the neighborhood because it was Brooklyn and there was like a chef every other door. So I started publishing my work that way. And amazingly enough, neighbors noticed. And one of those neighbors was Grace Bonney, who runs Design Sponge. And she was actually a fan of my column, and I just thought, that's pretty awesome. I didn't know that until I was like driving back from a trip upstate with my boyfriend, and I turned to him after I got her email inquiring about doing a series of design icon illustrations for the website, and I just like turned to him and I was like, I think everything's about to change. So it was cool. And I think she kind of gave me my big break. I started working regularly for Design Sponge, doing that design icon series, but also doing a lot of maps that some of you might have seen for their 24 Hours In series. It was fun. I started to get a little bit of a map niche, and then I started regularly doing illustrations for Tasting Table too. So these were like weekly things that I did, so I was doing it all the time. And around then, my boyfriend gave me a Wacom tablet, which I was really not happy about at first, but I committed to using it every day. And after lots and lots of practice, I found that it really expedited my workflow, it changed the look of my work, and I really liked what it was doing to my work. And these are old, so maybe I don't love these now, but showing you progress. So, now might be a good time to mention that when I say I was totally committed to being an illustrator, it wasn't without one more quick detour. A year or so after getting laid off from my day job, I took a job as a web designer, and I promised myself I'd only do it for a year to save money. So I was working for Condé Nast for a while, and I had illustration as my side hustle then. I held true to my commitment though, and after a year, I gave my notice and I quit. And then I started working at a cheese shop a couple of days a week, which was really fun. And it kept me from going crazy waiting for people to contact me about illustration jobs, because it doesn't really happen like that, you know? And I started doing window displays for the cheese shop that I worked in, which they loved and I loved. And it was another way for me to practice my work and work in a new way. So a lot of people ask me, is there an easy way to transition from relative stability to uncertainty? And the answer is definitely no. But I think if you're ready, in your gut, you know it, and you just have to kind of go for it. And I think what changed in me at that point was that I was more receptive to the inconsistencies that an art career had to offer. I was actually pretty energized by the unpredictability. I was more flexible from working in so many cooperative environments, and I was more confident from having weathered mistakes, and less idealistic from having to meet deadlines and move on. And I was willing to acknowledge that I had to be bad at it before I could get good at it. And this is a piece that I did for House Lars Built Book Club, for Grace Bonney's book, In the Company of Women, and the quote is from Mary Going. And I really like it because it really exemplifies commitment. Suddenly, I did know what I wanted, and it wasn't just to be an illustrator. I wanted a career that I wouldn't want to retire from and that I could spend the rest of my life with. You know, every so often, it's a good idea to get out your compass and figure out where you are and remember where you were going. But you have to embrace the meander, because the detours are what make your journey unique, and they're what bring you to interesting conclusions. And there's going to be plenty of plateaus along the way. And plateaus are great because they give you a chance to catch your breath when you're on your journey. So I have a few things I want to share, just some quick tips for how to maintain a healthy relationship to your commitments. Number one, don't do things just because people tell you should do them. So, staying committed to things you don't really believe in is really likely to leave you disappointed and unfulfilled. You should do things that make sense to you and that work for you. So if you want to go to college, go to college. But if you don't think college is right for you, then maybe come up with a different alternative that suits you, because there's so many ways to get to where you want to be going. Number two, spend time apart from the thing you're committed to. So, I love drawing and I love painting, but the best ideas that I ever have come to me when I'm not doing either of those things. I like to get outside, I like to go for walks, I like to go for bike rides, and as a creative person, you need to give yourself headspace to come up with ideas, because ideas are what are going to set you apart from everybody else. Seek out a support system. When you start to get frustrated and you're having those thoughts like, wait, am I on the right path? I don't know what to charge for this, or I hate spreadsheets. You're going to be glad to have people around you who understand what you're going through and who can give you the kind of advice or support you need to make you stick with it. A strong support system like a business ladies meetup or a businessman's meetup, if that's a thing, is going to help you stick to it and find ways to make your business more sustainable and more profitable. I like to talk about this one because if, for example, you're constantly undercharging for your work or your services, you might get loads of work, but you're probably going to burn out fast and get bitter before you even know it. So if you share this kind of information with your peers, you're going to probably be able to make a more sustainable business model for yourself. Number four, experiment. This is a weird gift that I made. I don't know. It was an experiment. So I always advocate for having an open relationship with your creativity. Just because everyone knows and loves you for your funny cat paintings, for example, it doesn't mean you don't want to share other kinds of work. And maybe no one will care about these experiments that you do, but that doesn't mean they're not worth doing. You're going to have 100% more fun if you're constantly exploring and testing your skills. And you'll also be mad a lot because you're not going to do all the things well. I can attest. Number five, celebrate milestones. I'm highly pomp motivated, so I'll look for any reason to celebrate. And maybe it's your first year as a freelancer and it was a real slog, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve to give yourself a pat on the back, because it's not easy to hang in there. And number six, the last one that I'm going to give you is make it mean something. What do you want to put your energy towards? If you really want to stay interested in what you love, then you have to let your walls down, open up, and see where creativity, heart, and mind intersect. I think that as a young, practical girl in a practical world, I wanted to do something that was unequivocally functional. And I didn't see art like that. It felt inessential and inaccessible, like a luxury that was propped up by rich people. And there might be a little bit of truth to that in some instances, but it's not the rule. Art can be truly functional, and it is essential. Art and music and dance can open minds and hearts and give people hope, foster a sense of community, and I love when it does that. So the last thing that I want to say is that I think I might always be afraid of commitment, but I can say for certain that when I find something worth holding on to, I don't let go. Thank you.